My sister-in-law deliberately ruined my father's funeral, turning it into her wedding announcement. He's dead, time for celebration, she laughed. My husband supported her. I said nothing, buried my grief and began planning. On her wedding day, she discovered the price of cruelty. I was adjusting the flowers on my father's casket when Rachel cleared her throat behind me. Everyone, she called out, clapping her hands together like she was hosting a birthday party. Since we're all gathered here today, I have wonderful news to share. My hands froze on the white lilies. The funeral home fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I turned around slowly, hoping I'd misheard her. Rachel stood in the center of the room wearing a crisp white dress that looked suspiciously like something from a bridal catalog. Her smile was so bright it could have powered the entire building. Kelsey and I are getting married, she announced, throwing her arms up like she just won a game show. 3 months from today. The gasps around the room weren't the good kind. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually stepped backward. My father's business partner dropped his program on the floor. I watched 30 faces turn from confused to horrified in real time. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of quiet strength. If you believe that grief deserves respect and dignity, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. My husband Kelsey emerged from behind a flower arrangement, grinning like he'd just been crowned king of the world. He wrapped his arm around Rachel's waist and pulled her close. We wanted to tell the family all at once, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Dad would have wanted us to celebrate life, right? Dad. He called my father Dad. The man who'd been gone for exactly 72 hours. He's dead, time for celebration, Rachel laughed, the sound echoing off the funeral home walls. She actually threw her head back like she was at a comedy show. Life's too short to wait around moping. I stood there like a statue, my hands still resting on the casket. The wood felt warm under my palm, probably from the heat of all the flowers. My father's photograph smiled at me from its silver frame, the same gentle expression he'd worn when he taught me to ride a bike, when he walked me down the aisle, when he held my hand during my mother's funeral 15 years ago. Congratulations, someone mumbled from the back. I couldn't see who. The voices started blending together into a low murmur of awkward politeness. Rachel bounced on her toes. We're thinking a spring wedding. Something elegant, you know? Maybe at the old family house. She gestured toward the casket like my father was part of the decorations. He always said that house was meant for celebrations. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sandpaper. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand they leave immediately. Instead, I heard myself saying, "How lovely." The words came out automatic, like I was reading from a script I'd never seen before. My voice sounded calm, even pleased. People started moving again, forming little clusters around Rachel and Kelsey. Handshakes and hugs and excited chatter about wedding plans filled the space where prayers and memories should have been. I walked to the back of the room and sat down in a folding chair that squeaked under my weight. My cousin Sarah approached with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is completely inappropriate." "It's fine," I heard myself say again. "They're excited." Sarah stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "It's your father's funeral." "I know." I smoothed my black dress over my knees. "Family is important." She opened her mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. She squeezed my shoulder and walked away, shaking her head. For the next hour, I watched my father's funeral transform into an engagement party. Rachel held court near the guest book, showing off the ring Kelsey had apparently given her sometime between the viewing and the service. People who'd come to pay their respects found themselves discussing flower arrangements and venue options. Mrs. Chen, who'd known my father for 20 years, approached me with confusion written all over her face. "Dear, is this how funerals are done now?" "Every family is different," I replied, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. She nodded uncertainly and drifted away. I noticed people starting to leave earlier than planned. The whole atmosphere had shifted from solemn remembrance to uncomfortable celebration. By the time we were supposed to head to the cemetery, half the attendees had already gone home. During the burial, Rachel kept checking her phone. She whispered to Kelsey about catering options while the priest read the final prayers. When they lowered my father's casket into the ground, She was scrolling through what looked like wedding dress websites. Back at the house that evening, I sat on our bedroom floor with my father's favorite photograph in my hands. The image showed him at last year's Christmas dinner, wearing the awful reindeer sweater I'd bought him as a joke. He'd loved it so much he wore it 3 times that week. I could hear Rachel and Kelsey in the kitchen below, their voices carrying up through the heating vents. They were talking about honeymoon destinations and guest lists. Every few minutes one of them would burst into laughter. She didn't even cry. Rachel's voice drifted upward. Not once. It's like she doesn't even care that he's gone. She's always been weird about emotions, Kelsey replied. Remember when her mom died? Same thing. Just stood there like a robot. At least now we don't have to pretend to include him in wedding planning, Rachel said. Can you imagine? Oh, let me ask my dad first. Ugh. Their laughter floated through the floorboards. I set the photograph down gently and reached for the notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. Usually, I used it for grocery lists and appointment reminders. Tonight, I opened to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Then I started documenting everything I could remember. The white dress. The announcement timing. The exact words. The guests' reactions. The phone checking during the burial. Every detail that proved what kind of people they really were. I wasn't writing to preserve memories. I was writing to build evidence. My father had taught me that revenge was a dish best served cold. But he'd also taught me that the best strategies required careful planning. They won't forget this, I whispered to his photograph. Outside my window I could see the lights still on in the kitchen. They were probably making more wedding plans, celebrating their perfect timing and my apparent weakness. They thought I was broken, that grief had made me compliant and easy to ignore. They had no idea what they'd just awakened. The notebook grew thicker each week. By February I'd filled 37 pages with their daily habits, conversation snippets and weekend patterns. Rachel liked her coffee at exactly 7:15 each morning. Kelsey checked his phone obsessively between 9 and 10 p.m. They both assumed I was upstairs reading when they had their most candid conversations in the living room. I discovered that being ignored had unexpected advantages. When someone considers you invisible, they stop filtering their words around you. They forget you're even there. The caterer wants a deposit by March, Rachel mentioned one Tuesday evening, painting her nails bright red on our coffee table. Good thing we'll have access to the house account soon. Kelsey was sprawled across the couch, scrolling through sports highlights. How soon? Well, technically it's already hours since he's gone. We just need to sort out the paperwork. She blew on her nails. The lawyer said it might take a few months, but the house is definitely coming to us. I was folding laundry in the adjacent dining room, moving quietly between the table and the basket. They'd stopped noticing my presence weeks ago. To them I was just background noise, like the dishwasher running or the heater cycling on. What about the old documents in his desk? Kelsey asked. Should we go through those? Eventually. Most of it's probably junk anyway. Rachel capped her nail polish. I'm more interested in updating that kitchen. Those cabinets are so outdated. That Friday, while they were at Rachel's bachelorette planning lunch, I drove to my father's house. The spare key was still hidden under the third flower pot, exactly where it had been since I was 12. The familiar creak of the front door brought back memories of summer visits and holiday gatherings. His desk sat in the corner of the study, exactly as he'd left it. I started with the bottom drawer, working my way through old bills, insurance papers, and maintenance records. Most of it was routine household documentation, but tucked behind a folder of warranty information I found something interesting. The letter was dated 18 months ago, written on official county letterhead. It outlined a property tax dispute that had never been resolved. According to the documentation, my father had been contesting the assessed value, but the case had stalled somewhere in the bureaucratic maze. The house had accumulated significant back taxes during the dispute process. I photographed every page with my phone, then carefully replaced everything exactly where I'd found it. On my way out, I noticed Rachel had already started leaving little touches around the house. A throw pillow here, a decorative candle there. She was marking her territory before the ownership was even official. Monday morning I called my childhood friend Marcus. We'd grown up 3 houses apart and stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional coffee meetings. He'd mentioned during our last conversation that he worked for a property acquisition company. I need a favor, I told him over lunch at the diner near his office. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to purchase a property that had tax issues, how would they go about it? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically. Let's just say I'm curious about the process. He explained how tax liens worked, how properties could end up in foreclosure, and how private buyers could sometimes step in before public auctions. The conversation was educational in ways I hadn't expected. When I mentioned my father's house specifically, Marcus offered to look into the legal status. I could pose as a potential buyer, he suggested, just to get the paperwork and see what's actually happening with the case. Within a week, Marcus had gathered enough information to confirm what the letter had implied. The property taxes hadn't been paid in 4 years. The county was preparing to move forward with foreclosure proceedings, but they'd been delayed due to my father's ongoing dispute. With him gone, the case would likely accelerate. I started spending my Tuesday and Thursday shopping trips, meeting with lawyers instead. I learned about estate settlements, property transfers, and legal loopholes that could work in creative ways. The consultation fees were adding up, but I'd been quietly moving money from our joint account into a separate savings account for months. Kelsey never checked our finances. He'd handed over all money management to me after our 3rd year of marriage, claiming he was too busy to deal with bank statements and budgets. That trust was about to become his biggest mistake. Meanwhile, their wedding planning conversations grew increasingly detailed. They'd chosen the ancestral house as their venue, assuming ownership would transfer smoothly. They'd already put deposits down with vendors, sent save-the-date cards, and started planning the honeymoon. One evening in late February, I was organizing kitchen cabinets when I overheard their most revealing conversation yet. "We should definitely convert the house into an Airbnb afterward," Rachel said. "Tourism is booming in this area. We could charge premium rates for a historic family home experience." Kelsey laughed. "Daddy's memories will pay for our honeymoon." That sentence stopped me cold. I stood frozen with a stack of dinner plates in my hands, letting their words sink in completely. They weren't just planning to live in my father's house. They were planning to commercialize it, to turn his lifetime of memories into profit for strangers. I carefully set the plates down and walked upstairs to retrieve my phone. That night, I started recording their conversations whenever possible. I bought a small digital recorder and learned how to use voice-activated recording apps. Every cruel joke, every dismissive comment, every plan to exploit my father's legacy got documented. By March, I had enough evidence to fuel my anger for years. But more importantly, I had enough information to build a strategy. Marcus had agreed to pose as a buyer when the time was right. The lawyers had outlined several possible approaches. The financial pieces were falling into place. Rachel and Kelsey continued treating me like furniture, never suspecting that the quiet woman folding their laundry was methodically dismantling their future. They saw grief and compliance where I was actually cultivating patience and precision. Their wedding was 3 months away. That gave me exactly enough time to ensure their celebration would be memorable for all the wrong reasons. The first time I saw them return from visiting the ancestral house, I understood what I was truly fighting for. Rachel practically floated through our front door, her cheeks flushed with excitement and her eyes bright with the kind of joy I hadn't seen since their engagement announcement. "The light in the morning room is absolutely perfect," she gushed to Kelsey, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "We'll get ready there on the wedding day. Can you imagine the photos?" Kelsey wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Mom always said that room brought out everyone's best features." I was washing dishes at the sink, my back to them, but I could see their reflection in the window. They looked like they were planning to inhabit a fairy tale. The house wasn't just a venue to them. It was their birthright, their kingdom, their proof that they'd inherited something magnificent. "I called the photographer," Rachel continued. "She wants to do engagement shots on the front porch next weekend. Those columns are so dramatic." Over the following days, their visits to the house became ritualistic. Every Sunday afternoon, they'd drive over with measuring tapes and fabric samples, returning hours later with renewed energy and increasingly elaborate plans. They'd spread wedding magazines across our dining table, pointing out decorations that would complement the house's architecture. "The chandelier in the foyer needs cleaning," Rachel mentioned one evening, circling chandelier photos in a bridal magazine. "But once it's polished, it'll be the perfect backdrop for the ceremony." I started timing my own visits to the house for Tuesday mornings, when I knew they'd be at work. The elderly caretaker, Mr. Patel, still came by twice a week to check on things and maintain the garden. He'd known my father since they were both young men in the neighborhood. "Your father was good to my family," Mr. Patel told me on my third visit, his weathered hands gentle as he watered the roses. "When my wife was sick, he paid for her medicines without telling anyone. Good man." I helped him deadhead the flowers, enjoying the peaceful routine. "Tell me about when Kelsey and Rachel were children here," I said casually. His expression shifted slightly. "Young Master Kelsey was always kind. But that girl..." He paused, considering his words carefully. "He had a mean streak. Once locked our housemaid in the storage closet for 3 hours because the woman accidentally moved her dollhouse." "What happened?" "The maid was crying when we found her. Miss Rachel told everyone the woman was playing hide and seek." Mr. Patel's voice carried decades of suppressed frustration. "She was maybe 10 years old then, but already knew how to lie convincingly." These conversations painted a picture I'd never seen before. The house held memories of birthday parties where Rachel would deliberately exclude certain children, Diwali celebrations where she'd break other kids' gifts accidentally, and family gatherings where she'd manipulate adults into taking her side in every dispute. "The house spoiled her," Mr. Patel admitted during one of our gardening sessions. "Too much space to hide bad behavior. Too many rooms where adults couldn't see what she was really doing." Meanwhile, their wedding planning intensified. They'd hired a photographer for an engagement session specifically at the house, transforming the front porch into a romantic backdrop with string lights and flowing fabrics. Rachel posted the photos on social media with captions about coming home and family legacy. But I'd discovered something they didn't know. While organizing my father's financial documents for the lawyers, I'd found correspondence showing that property taxes on the house hadn't been paid in 4 years. My father had been fighting the assessment, believing the county had overvalued the property. The dispute had created a bureaucratic stalemate, but with his death, that protection was gone. Kelsey had no idea about any of this. Financial management had become my responsibility early in our marriage, especially after a business trip where I'd had him sign several documents he'd barely glanced at. He trusted me completely with money matters, preferring to focus on his career and social life. The tax situation meant the house was vulnerable in ways Rachel and Kelsey couldn't imagine. They were planning their future around a property that was heading toward foreclosure. Every deposit they placed with vendors, every invitation they ordered, every dream they built was founded on quicksand. I started researching the city's Historic Preservation Board, learning about their funding sources and priorities. The house qualified for historic designation based on its age and architectural significance. More importantly, properties under historic review often receive temporary protection from foreclosure proceedings. One afternoon, I made an anonymous phone call to the Preservation Board. "I'd like to make a donation in memory of someone who loved historic architecture," I told the receptionist. "Specifically to support the review of properties in the Heritage District." The donation was substantial enough to fund a comprehensive review of several properties, including my father's house. The process would add months to any foreclosure timeline, creating the perfect window for alternative solutions. Marcus had been monitoring the legal situation closely. "The county is moving forward with the foreclosure," he reported during one of our coffee meetings. "But this historic review will slow things down significantly. If we time it right, I can put in a private bid before it goes to public auction." "How long do we have?" "Maybe 6 months if the Preservation Board moves slowly. The review process could stretch even longer if there are complications." That evening, I watched Rachel and Kelsey plan seating arrangements for their reception in the house's garden. They'd mapped out table locations under the old oak trees, envisioning a perfect May celebration surrounded by spring blooms. Their excitement was infectious, almost making me forget why I was sitting there taking notes on their every word. "Mom's china is still in the dining room hutch," Rachel mentioned, running her finger along our dining table as if she were already touching those dishes. "We'll use it for the head table. Something old, something borrowed." She had no idea that her mother's china, like everything else in that house, was about to slip through her fingers. The Preservation Board had already scheduled their initial assessment. Marcus was preparing the paperwork for his bid. The lawyers had confirmed the foreclosure timeline. All the childhood memories, all the family photographs, all the birthday parties and holiday celebrations that made that house their emotional center. None of it would protect them from what was coming. They thought they were inheriting a palace. Instead, they were planning a wedding in a house that would belong to someone else by their honeymoon. The morning of their wedding day dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of the ancestral house. I arrived early under the pretense of helping with final preparations, carrying a basket of emergency supplies that brides always seem to need. Rachel was already there, surrounded by her bridesmaids in the morning room, getting her makeup done by a professional artist they'd flown in from the city. "Hand me my phone," Rachel commanded one of her bridesmaids, not bothering to say please. "I want to post a getting ready selfie." She looked radiant in her ivory lace gown, the kind of dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. The morning light caught the beading on her bodice, creating tiny rainbows across the walls. For a moment I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Almost. "The photographer wants you on the front steps in 10 minutes, another bridesmaid announced, checking her watch. "The lighting is perfect right now." I watched through the window as Kelsey emerged from the men's preparation room, adjusting his bow tie and grinning at his groomsmen. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years, practically bouncing on his toes with excitement. They'd both been counting down to this day for months, marking off calendar squares and checking items off their wedding timeline. The photo session on the front steps was everything they'd dreamed of. Rachel posed against the white columns, her dress flowing down the stone steps like something from a magazine. Kelsey joined her for couple shots, both of them laughing and stealing kisses between poses. I stood off to the side with the other family members, invisible as always, watching them create memories in front of a house that no longer belonged to them. "Beautiful couple," someone murmured beside me. "Absolutely," I agreed, checking my watch. 11:30. Right on schedule. At exactly noon, while the wedding party was taking group photos in the garden, I stepped away from the crowd and pulled out my phone. The local news station had a tip line that I'd researched weeks earlier. The reporter who answered sounded bored until I started talking. "You might want to check the county records today," I said, keeping my voice low. "There's a big family wedding happening at the Heritage District House on Maple Street. The thing is, the family doesn't actually own that house anymore. It was sold yesterday. The new owner might surprise you." "What kind of surprise?" The reporter's interest was clearly piqued. "Let's just say it's a story about community service and women helping women. The paperwork should be public record by now." I hung up and slipped back into the crowd, just in time to see Rachel tossing her bouquet to a group of squealing bridesmaids. They had no idea that 3 blocks away, a news van was already pulling into the station parking lot. The reception was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock in the back garden. White tents had been set up between the oak trees, with round tables draped in expensive linens and centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. A string quartet played softly near the fountain while guests found their seats. That's when my phone started buzzing with notifications. The local news had posted their story online, and social media was already picking it up. "Family wedding turns into eviction drama," was trending locally within minutes. Rachel was still blissfully unaware, gliding between tables and accepting congratulations from guests. She looked like a princess in her own fairy tale, completely confident that this was her day, her house, her triumph. The catering manager approached her first, his face pale and worried. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to discuss something urgently." "Not now," Rachel waved him away. "Can't you see I'm greeting my guests?" "Ma'am, there's been a development with the property ownership. Our insurance company is requiring immediate clarification before we can continue service." Kelsey appeared at Rachel's side, his smile faltering. "What kind of development?" That's when their phones started ringing. Friends and family members who weren't at the wedding had seen the news story. Social media notifications were pinging constantly. Guests began pulling out their own phones, reading headlines and showing each other screenshots. "What's going on?" Rachel demanded, but her voice had an edge of panic now. The catering manager pulled out his tablet and showed them the news article. The headline read, "Historic Family Home Donated to Women's Shelter Network in Memory of Beloved Community Member." Rachel's face went white beneath her carefully applied makeup. "This is impossible. This is our house. Ma'am, according to this article, the property was transferred yesterday to a non-profit organization. The title change was processed through the county clerk's office. Kelsey was frantically scrolling through his phone, trying to access county records. This has to be a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. But it wasn't a mistake. Marcus had executed the purchase perfectly, timing the title transfer to become public record exactly 24 hours before their wedding. The press release from the Women's Shelter Network had been scheduled to go out simultaneously, creating maximum impact. The story was already spreading beyond local news. Ancestral Home Becomes Safe Haven was being shared across multiple platforms, with photos of the house and quotes from shelter administrators about creating healing spaces for women escaping difficult situations. Within an hour, vendors started backing out. The florist packed up the remaining arrangements. The DJ announced he couldn't continue without proper venue authorization. The photographer stopped taking pictures, uncertain about liability issues. Rachel was no longer the radiant bride from the morning photos. Her makeup was smeared from crying angry tears, and her voice had gone hoarse from arguing with vendors. "This is sabotage," she kept screaming. "Someone is deliberately ruining our wedding." Kelsey tried calling the lawyer who had handled our prenuptial agreement, but the number went straight to a disconnected message. He didn't know that I'd quietly switched legal representation 6 months ago, or that our new attorney had ensured all our financial arrangements would protect my interests if our marriage fell apart. Guests began leaving in confused clusters, unsure whether to offer congratulations or condolences. The ones who stayed seemed more interested in witnessing the drama than celebrating the marriage. "We can move the reception to the hotel," someone suggested. "With what money?" Kelsey snapped. Everything was supposed to be paid for through the house account. That's when the full scope of their financial situation began unraveling. The deposits they'd paid to vendors, the loans they'd taken against the house's value, the credit they'd extended based on expected inheritance. All of it was built on ownership they'd never actually possessed. I stood in the shadow of an oak tree, watching their perfect day crumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. They spun around each other frantically, trying to solve problems that had no solutions, grasping for control of a situation I'd spent months carefully orchestrating. The irony was perfect. They'd planned their celebration in a house full of memories, and now their wedding day would create the most memorable moment of all, the day their fairy tale collapsed completely. By Sunday morning, the wedding disaster had become the top story on 3 local news stations. I made coffee in my quiet kitchen while watching Rachel's meltdown play on repeat across every channel. The footage showed her in her ruined wedding dress, screaming at the catering manager while mascara streaked down her cheeks. Someone had captured the moment she threw her bouquet at a departing guest, the flowers exploding against a car window in slow motion. The hashtag WeddingGate was trending locally by noon. Social media users were sharing screenshots of Rachel's old posts about inheriting family legacy, alongside photos of her tantrum. The comments were brutal but fair. People were calling her entitled, spoiled, and worse things that the news stations couldn't broadcast. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Mrs. Chin. "Saw the news. Are you okay, dear?" I typed back, "Just fine, thank you for asking." The women's shelter had scheduled a press conference for Monday afternoon, right on the front steps where Rachel had posed for her wedding photos just 2 days earlier. I drove by during my lunch break and found the street packed with news vans and community supporters. A banner reading "Safe Homes for Strong Women" hung between the same columns where Rachel had dreamed of saying her vows. The shelter director, a woman named Patricia with silver hair and kind eyes, spoke about the donation with genuine emotion. "This beautiful home will provide transitional housing for women rebuilding their lives." Mr. Patel believed every woman deserved safety and dignity. Behind her, I could see women from the shelter holding their children, some wiping away tears of gratitude. One young mother stepped forward to speak about fleeing an abusive situation with nothing but the clothes on her back. The contrast between her quiet strength and Rachel's public breakdown couldn't have been more stark. The story was picked up by regional news outlets by Tuesday. Local wedding becomes symbol of community support, ran across 3 counties. Rachel's name was attached to every article, but not in the way she'd always imagined. Instead of being celebrated as a beautiful bride, She was known as the woman who'd thrown a public tantrum when her entitlement was exposed. Kelsey burst through our front door Wednesday evening like a hurricane, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and his usually perfect hair stuck up in several directions. "How could you do this to us?" he shouted, slamming his briefcase down on the kitchen counter hard enough to rattle the dishes. "My coworkers are laughing at me. My boss asked if I need time off to handle my personal affairs. Rachel can't leave her apartment because reporters keep calling her." I continued folding laundry at the dining room table, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Do what exactly? Don't play innocent. You orchestrated this whole thing. The house sale, the timing, everything." I set down the shirt I'd been folding and walked to the filing cabinet in our home office. The prenuptial agreement was exactly where I'd kept it for 7 years, in a folder labeled Legal Documents. I pulled it out and placed it on the counter between us. "You signed this," I said, pointing to his signature on the bottom of page 3. Section 12 clearly states that any inheritance disputes would be handled through individual legal representation, not shared assets. Kelsey stared at the document like he'd never seen it before. "That's not what this is about. Read Section 15. I turned the page for him. "You agreed that financial decisions made during periods of family crisis would be protected from spousal interference. You left me alone to bury my father while you celebrated with her. I made decisions accordingly." His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can't seriously be using a technicality from our prenup to justify destroying our lives." "I didn't destroy anything. I honored my father's memory by ensuring his house would help women who actually need safety." I closed the document and looked directly into his eyes. "You chose her side at his funeral. These are the consequences." He stood there for a long moment, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and bitter. "I'm filing for divorce. That's your choice." I picked up the shirt I'd been folding. "I won't contest it." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'll make it easy for you. No fighting, no drama. You can have whatever personal belongings you want. The lawyers can handle the rest." Thursday morning, Kelsey was served with divorce papers at his office. By Thursday evening, he was back home with 2 large suitcases, packing his clothes with the efficiency of someone who wanted to finish an unpleasant task quickly. "The joint checking account is frozen," he said from the closet, his voice muffled by hanging clothes. "No, it's not. You just don't have access anymore." I sat on the bed watching him stuff shirts into his suitcase without folding them. "I moved your portion to a separate account. The information is on the kitchen counter." He emerged from the closet holding a stack of ties. "What about the house? What about it? My name is on the deed." "Actually, it's not. Hasn't been for 6 months." I handed him an envelope from the nightstand. "Your signature was removed when you signed those papers during our anniversary dinner. You thought they were insurance updates." Kelsey's face went pale as he opened the envelope and scanned the documents. "You tricked me. I protected myself. There's a difference." He finished packing in silence, moving through our shared spaces like a stranger collecting borrowed items. When he reached the front door with his 2 suitcases, he turned back one last time. "Rachel was right about you," he said. "You're not the person I married." "No," I agreed. "I'm better." After he left, the house felt larger and quieter than it had in years. I made myself dinner, watched the evening news coverage of the shelter's renovation plans, and went to bed early for the first time in months. Friday brought an unexpected message to my phone from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Jake, Kelsey's cousin. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. I just wanted to say I always admired your strength during family gatherings. I never realized how quiet power works until now. What you did for those women was incredible. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The weekend passed peacefully. No wedding planning conversations echoed through my house. No cruel laughter drifted up from the kitchen. No one called me boring or spineless or compared me to the dead. For the first time since my father's funeral, I felt completely, genuinely at peace. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a handwritten invitation in my mailbox. The Women's Shelter Network was hosting an open house to show the community how the donated property had been transformed. The invitation was signed by Patricia, the shelter director, with a personal note. "We'd love for you to see what your father's gift has become." I drove over on a sunny Saturday morning, parking across the street where I could see the full transformation. The house looked completely different. The weathered gray siding had been painted a warm butter yellow that seemed to glow in the morning light. New flower beds lined the walkway, bursting with colorful annuals that created a welcoming path to the front door. Even the old iron fence had been repaired and painted white, making the property look cared for in a way it hadn't been in years. A small girl with pigtails was sitting on the front porch, coloring in a book while her mother chatted with another woman nearby. When she saw me approaching, she looked up and waved enthusiastically, her crayon still clutched in her tiny fist. I waved back, surprised by the simple joy in that gesture. "Are you here for the tour?" asked a volunteer at the front door, offering me a name tag and an informational brochure. "We're so excited to show everyone what this place has become." Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The formal living room where Rachel used to hold court had been converted into a children's play area, with soft carpeting, low bookshelves, and bins full of toys. Crayon drawings were taped to the walls at child height, creating a colorful gallery of stick figures, rainbows, and houses with crooked chimneys. The dining room had become a computer lab with several workstations where women could search for jobs, complete online education courses, or video chat with family members. A bulletin board displayed success stories, photos of graduates who had found permanent housing, completed job training programs, or started their own businesses. "This used to be someone's family home," Patricia explained to a small group of visitors. The donor specifically wanted it to become a place where women could rebuild their own families in safety. I followed the tour upstairs, where the bedrooms had been converted into private living spaces for residents. Each room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and small dresser. What struck me most were the personal touches: children's artwork taped to mirrors, family photos on nightstands, books stacked carefully on windowsills. In what used to be the master bedroom, I found a wall display that made me stop in my tracks. It was covered with framed letters from former residents, thanking the shelter for helping them escape dangerous situations. Some were typed, others handwritten in careful script, but all conveyed the same message of gratitude and hope. One letter caught my attention. "Dear staff, when I arrived here with my 2 children, I had nothing but the clothes on our backs and fear in my heart. This house gave us more than shelter. It gave us time to heal and plan for a real future. My daughter draws pictures of this house when people ask her about her safe place. Thank you for showing us that not all homes have to be scary." At the bottom of the display was a small plaque I hadn't noticed from the doorway. "In memory of families who deserve safety, dignity, and hope." Patricia appeared beside me as I read the letters. "The donor asked us to create this display," she said quietly. She wanted people to understand that homes should be places of peace, not fear. "The donor?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A local woman who lost her father recently. She said he taught her that real strength comes from protecting others, not from having power over them." Patricia touched the plaque gently. "She visits sometimes, usually when she thinks no one will notice. Always brings books for the children's library." I made my way back downstairs, where the tour was ending, in the kitchen. The old formal dining room had been opened up to create a large community space where residents could cook together, share meals, and build the kind of friendships that help people heal from trauma. A woman named Maria was preparing lunch with her teenage daughter, both of them laughing as they tried to flip pancakes without making a mess. "We've been here 4 months, Maria told another visitor. "My daughter's grades have improved so much since we moved in. She says this is the first place that's ever felt like home." Before leaving, I walked to the fireplace in what used to be the formal living room. Someone had placed a small table nearby where visitors could sign a guest book or leave donations. Above the mantel, in a simple wooden frame, was my father's last photograph. The one from Christmas dinner where he wore that ridiculous reindeer sweater. Beneath it, exactly as I'd requested, was a brass plaque. "For every daughter who was told to stay silent. In memory of Arvind Patel, a man who listened." A woman approached the memorial while I was standing there, holding a young boy's hand. "Who was he?" the child asked, pointing at the photograph. "Someone who believed all children should feel safe in their homes," she answered softly. I signed the guest book using my maiden name, then walked back to my car. A reporter from the local paper was interviewing Patricia on the front steps, asking about the shelter's success rate and future plans. I heard Patricia mention that 90% of their residents had found permanent housing within 6 months, and that they had a waiting list of women hoping for admission. What about the original family who lived here? The reporter asked. Do they ever visit? The house belongs to the community now, Patricia replied diplomatically. But I think the man who used to live here would be proud of what it's become. Driving home, I thought about Rachel and Kelsey for the first time in weeks. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Rachel had moved back in with her parents, and that Kelsey was renting a small apartment across town. Their fairy tale ending had crumbled completely, but somehow that felt less important now than it had months ago. People occasionally asked if I missed them, if I regretted the way things had ended, if I ever wondered what might have been different. The truth was simple. I didn't miss them at all. I only missed my father, and now his memory was doing something meaningful in the world. I hadn't just taken their house. I'd given it purpose, transformed their symbol of privilege into a beacon of hope for women who had nowhere else to go. In choosing healing over hatred, I'd built something greater than revenge. I'd built peace, for myself and for every woman who walked through those yellow doors seeking safety. That felt like the best possible ending to the story. If this story of quiet justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she placed her father's photograph in the shelter, transforming revenge into healing. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Miranda, 32, and I survived being pushed from a helicopter by my own sister. Ashley and my husband Brent plotted my death for a $5 million insurance payout. Everyone thought I was dead for weeks while I fought to survive in the Alaskan wilderness. The look on their faces when I walked into my own funeral? Priceless. Before I dive into this nightmare, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this wild journey of betrayal and survival. Growing up, Ashley and I were inseparable. Two sisters born just 3 years apart, we shared everything from clothes to secrets to dreams. When our parents died in a car accident when I was 20 and Ashley was 23, our bond seemed unbreakable. We only had each other now, and the modest inheritance our parents left behind. Ashley was always the responsible one, cautious, planning everything meticulously, while I was more of a risk-taker. I used my portion of the inheritance to start a tech consulting business that thrived beyond my wildest expectations. Within 5 years, my company was valued at over $15 million, and I was featured in Business Weekly as one of the top 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. Ashley took a different path. She invested her inheritance in what seemed like a stable retail franchise, but a combination of poor location, economic downturn, and possibly mismanagement led to its failure within 2 years. She lost almost everything and had to start over working entry-level marketing jobs, struggling to pay off the business debts she'd accumulated. I never lorded my success over her. In fact, I offered to help numerous times, but Ashley had too much pride. "I'll figure it out myself," she always said with that tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. I respected her independence, but looking back, I should have seen the resentment building beneath the surface. The sidelong glances when I mentioned a new client, the slight stiffening when I talked about buying my lakeside house, the forced enthusiasm when I took her shopping and insisted on paying. That's where Brent came into my life, at a charity gala I was sponsoring for child literacy. He was working the event as a financial advisor to some of the wealthy donors. Tall, with dark wavy hair and an easy laugh that made everyone feel special, Brent caught my attention immediately. He approached me with a glass of champagne and a compliment about my speech that was specific enough to show he'd actually been listening. "You connected educational opportunity to innovation in a way that made even the tech-averse dinosaurs in this room perk up," he said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's a rare gift." Our connection was immediate and intense. Within 3 months, we were living together. By 6 months, he had proposed with a vintage emerald ring that showed he'd been paying attention when I mentioned once that diamonds felt too obvious. At our wedding a year after meeting, Ashley was my maid of honor, beaming beside me in the photos that would later be displayed at my funeral. What I didn't know then was that Brent's career was in trouble. He'd made some ethically questionable investment recommendations to clients that hadn't yet come to light, but had forced him to switch firms twice in the year before we met. His charming persona and network kept him employed, but his income was nowhere near what he implied. When we merged our finances after marriage, I was surprised to find substantial debt and minimal savings, but he explained it away as investing in himself through advanced certifications and temporary setbacks. I believed him completely. That was my first mistake. Looking back, there were signs that Ashley and Brent had an unusual connection from the start. They laughed at the same obscure jokes, often completed each other's sentences, and sometimes I'd walk into a room to find them in deep conversation that would abruptly shift when I appeared. I thought it was wonderful that my sister and husband got along so well. Their closeness seemed like a blessing. "You're so lucky," my friend Jessica told me once. "Most women have to deal with their husband and sister hating each other. You've got the dream team." The dream team. What a joke that would turn out to be. The first real sign that something was off came about 2 years into my marriage. I came home early from a business trip to surprise Brent and overheard him and Ashley in our kitchen. They weren't doing anything inappropriate, just talking, but their voices had an intensity, a secrecy that made me pause outside the door. "She'd never agree to it," Ashley whispered. "You know how she is about control." "We don't have to decide anything now," Brent replied. "But the opportunity won't last forever." When I walked in, they jumped apart like guilty teenagers, explaining they were discussing a surprise birthday party for me. I accepted the explanation, even though my birthday was still 5 months away. I wanted to believe them. Then financial documents started disappearing from my home office. Investment statements, insurance policies, the business succession plan I'd created with my lawyers. When I mentioned the missing papers, Brent suggested I was working too hard and misplacing things. He even helped me search for them, eventually finding them filed in the wrong folders. There were strange reactions, too, when I talked about future plans. Mentions of our 5th anniversary trip to Japan were met with vague enthusiasm from Brent. When I talked about expanding my business to international markets, which would require more travel for me, both Ashley and Brent seemed oddly interested in the logistics of how long I'd be gone and how often. Brent began having unexplained absences, networking events that couldn't be verified, client meetings that ran mysteriously late, golf games that left no mud on his shoes. When questioned, he'd get defensive, accusing me of not trusting him. "You're so suspicious lately," he'd say. "Is this how it's going to be forever? You, successful and doubting me at every turn?" The guilt would work every time. I'd back down, apologize, remind myself that relationships require trust. I ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe in the life I thought we were building. I didn't want to be the suspicious, controlling wife. I wanted to be the supportive partner who believed in her husband unconditionally. That unconditional trust would nearly cost me my life. The invitation to the helicopter tour came as part of my annual executive retreat in Alaska. Every year, my company's leadership team spent a week at a luxury wilderness lodge, combining strategic planning with outdoor adventures. This particular year, we were scheduled to take helicopter tours of the glaciers and remote mountain ranges, a highlight of the trip that everyone looked forward to. 2 weeks before the retreat, during Sunday brunch at our house, I mentioned the helicopter tours to Ashley and Brent. "It sounds amazing," Ashley said, her eyes lighting up with what I now recognize as calculation rather than excitement. "I've always wanted to see Alaska from the air." "You should come with me," I suggested impulsively. "The company has a friends and family day. You could join for the helicopter tour and the evening banquet." I expected her to decline. Ashley usually avoided my company events, saying they made her feel like the poor relation. But this time, she immediately accepted. "I could use a mini vacation," she said. "Things have been so stressful at work lately." Brent encouraged the idea enthusiastically. "You two haven't had sister time in ages. It's perfect." That same week, Brent brought up the subject of life insurance. We already had policies through my company, but he suggested we needed additional coverage. Your business is growing, he reasoned. We need to make sure everything's protected in case something happens to you. What if a client sues? What if there's an accident? His concerns seemed reasonable. As the primary breadwinner with a growing company, additional insurance made sense. I agreed to the policy without much thought. $5 million that would go to Brent if I died, with Ashley named as the secondary beneficiary, just in case, as Brent suggested. The insurance agent seemed surprised at the amount and asked several questions about why we needed such extensive coverage so quickly. Brent smoothly explained it was for business liability protection and estate planning purposes. His background in financial services made his explanation sound legitimate, and I was too busy with quarter-end reports to pay much attention to the details. As the trip approached, Brent became increasingly affectionate and attentive. He planned special dinners, brought home flowers for no reason, and kept telling me to enjoy every moment of my trip. At the time, I interpreted this as loving support. Now I recognize it as the guilty conscience of a man saying goodbye. The night before my departure, he held me longer than usual. I need you to know how much you mean to me, he said, his voice thick with what I thought was emotion but was probably just well-practiced deception. Ashley gave me an unusual gift the morning of my flight, an expensive bottle of perfume. It's your favorite, she insisted, though I'd never worn that scent before. I spritzed it on to please her, not realizing she wanted me heavily scented to mask any other smells later, like fear or adrenaline, that might alert the pilot to something amiss. When we arrived in Alaska, the beauty of the landscape momentarily made me forget any lingering concerns. The jagged mountains, ancient glaciers, and vast wilderness created a sense of peaceful insignificance. How small human problems seemed in such a majestic setting. The morning of the helicopter tour dawned clear and bright, perfect flying conditions. Ashley seemed unusually interested in the details of our excursion. Which route are we taking? How long will we be in the air? How many people per helicopter? Are the doors removed for better photos? Her questions seemed excessive, but I attributed her intensity to excitement. We were assigned to a helicopter with just one other passenger, an older gentleman from my finance team who, at the last minute, complained of altitude sickness and didn't board. That left just Ashley, me, and the pilot, a gruff local named Tom who had been flying these routes for 20 years. As we lifted off, Ashley clutched her seat with white knuckles. I teased her about being nervous, not recognizing that her anxiety stemmed from what she was planning to do, not fear of flying. About 30 minutes into our flight, we were hovering over a particularly remote area of wilderness, miles from any trails or ranger stations. Tom received a call on his radio and explained he needed to check something with the ground crew. Just a quick stop at this service station, he explained, pointing to a small outpost below. Fuel gauge is acting funny. Won't take more than 5 minutes. He landed smoothly on a small pad, turned to us and said, "Sit tight, ladies. Keep your harnesses on. I'll be right back." The moment he stepped out, Ashley's demeanor changed completely. The nervous sister was replaced by someone calculating and cold. "Let's get some photos while he's gone," she suggested, unbuckling her harness. The view from the door would be amazing. I followed her, trusting as always. She opened the helicopter door, the rush of mountain air hitting us both. I stepped toward the opening, camera ready. "The light is perfect," I said, looking out at the wilderness below. "Perfect for what I need to do," Ashley replied. I turned, confused by her tone, just in time to see her expression harden with resolve. In that moment, her face became a stranger's, cold, determined, without a trace of sisterly love. Her hands connected with my shoulders in a violent push. There was no hesitation, no sign of inner conflict. I remember her eyes most clearly, flat and businesslike, as if she were merely completing a transaction. The force sent me tumbling backward, out of the helicopter. As I fell, our eyes met one final time. She didn't look away or show remorse. Instead, she reached for the door handle to close it, already moving on to the next step in her plan. Then I was falling, the helicopter growing smaller above me, the vast Alaskan wilderness rushing up to meet me. The human body falls at about 120 miles per hour in a free drop. But I wasn't in a free drop. My body tumbled and spun, creating drag. And then there were the trees, the dense pine forest that both saved and nearly killed me. I crashed through the upper branches, each impact slowing my descent, but also inflicting damage. Ribs cracked.
Skin tore.
A branch as thick as my arm connected with my left leg, snapping the femur with a sickening sound that somehow registered even through my terror. The final impact knocked me unconscious. When I came to, minutes or hours later, I couldn't tell. The physical pain hit me in waves of such intensity that I vomited. My tailored business suit was shredded, one pump missing, blood soaking through the silk blouse I'd chosen so carefully that morning. But the physical agony paled compared to the emotional impact of what had happened. My sister had tried to murder me. My own flesh and blood had looked me in the eyes and pushed me to what should have been my death. And Brent, he must have known. The insurance policy, the sudden interest in my trip details, the strange goodbye. They had planned this together. I screamed then, a primal sound of rage and betrayal that scattered nearby birds from their perches. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the pain in my chest from my broken ribs forced me to stop. And then, lying there in the wilderness, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I would not die. I would survive, not just for justice, but for the pure defiance of ruining their carefully laid plans. The first task was assessing my injuries. The broken femur was the most serious and immediately threatening. I couldn't walk, and an untreated break like that could lead to fat embolism, infection, or deadly blood loss. Using strips torn from my suit jacket and broken branches from around me, I constructed a crude splint. The process nearly made me pass out multiple times, but I kept going, focusing on Ashley's face as she pushed me, using my rage as anesthesia. Next was shelter. The Alaska wilderness, even in summer, gets dangerously cold at night. I dragged myself under a fallen log, creating a small protected space lined with pine boughs for insulation. My watch, miraculously still working, told me it was late afternoon. I had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. Water would be critical. I could hear a stream nearby, but couldn't reach it with my broken leg. Instead, I tore the silk lining from my jacket and stretched it over a depression in the ground, creating a collection device for dew and any rain that might fall. As night approached, the temperature dropped dramatically. I was dressed for a climate-controlled helicopter and business meeting, not wilderness survival. Hypothermia became my most immediate threat. I pulled every pine branch and piece of forest debris I could reach into my makeshift shelter, creating layers between me and the cold ground. I wrapped my torso in the remains of my suit jacket, leaving my injured leg elevated on a mound of gathered moss. Through that first night, drifting between consciousness and delirium, I had plenty of time to think. Why had Ashley done this? The insurance money, obviously, but was that all? Had she hated me all these years while pretending to be the loving sister? Had every shared birthday, every holiday, every late-night conversation been a lie? And Brent, had anything in our marriage been real? The questions circled like hungry wolves, but I forced them away. Psychological autopsy could wait. Survival came first. Dawn brought rain, both blessing and curse. I managed to collect enough water in my silk lining to quench my raging thirst, but the dampness made controlling my body temperature even more difficult. By midday, I was shivering uncontrollably, a bad sign. I needed to signal for help, but in this remote area, who would see? The diamond earrings Brent had given me for our anniversary became tools. I placed one on a rock where sunlight might hit it and create a reflection visible from the air. The other I kept as a cutting tool, using the hard edge to sharpen sticks and slice through the tougher materials of my clothing to create bandages for my numerous cuts. The second day brought fever. Infection was setting in, either from my leg or one of the many lacerations covering my body. I chewed pine needles, having vaguely remembered reading about their vitamin C content and antiseptic properties. The bitter taste was oddly comforting. At least I was doing something, fighting in some small way. By the third day, I was slipping in and out of consciousness more frequently. The pain had become a constant companion, almost separate from me. I named it Ashley, which seemed fitting. In more lucid moments, I focused on my business training, problem-solving, resource allocation, critical path analysis. I'd built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Surely I could survive this. I created mental flowcharts for different scenarios. If rescue came, what information would I need to remember? If the fever worsened, what were my options? If an animal discovered my shelter, how would I defend myself? The structured thinking kept panic at bay and gave me the illusion of control in a situation where I had almost none. On what I believe was the fourth day, voices woke me from a feverish dream about falling. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but the sounds persisted, human voices calling back and forth to each other. Through here. Watch that drop-off. How much farther to the summit? Hikers. Recreational hikers on a trail I had known was relatively close by. With every ounce of strength remaining, I called out, a hoarse, broken sound that seemed too weak to travel more than a few feet. I tried again, louder, ignoring the searing pain in my ribs. The voices stopped. Then, did you hear that? Probably just a bird. No, listen, there it is again. I kept calling, using my good leg to bang a stick against a nearby log for additional noise. The minutes stretched agonizingly until suddenly, foliage parted, and two shocked faces appeared, a young couple in bright outdoor gear, utterly unprepared for the bloody, broken woman they found in the wilderness. "Oh my God," the woman whispered. "Jared, call for emergency evac now." The man fumbled for a satellite phone. "What happened? Who are you?" "My name is Miranda Taylor," I managed to say. "My sister pushed me from a helicopter 4 days ago. She and my husband are trying to kill me for insurance money." Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances: shock, disbelief, and the awkward uncertainty of how to respond to such an outlandish statement. "Let's focus on getting you help first," the woman, who introduced herself as Rachel, said diplomatically. "Everything else can wait." The rescue helicopter arrived within 2 hours, the cruel irony of being saved by the same type of aircraft that had been the instrument of my intended murder was not lost on me. The emergency medics were efficient and kind, expressing amazement that I had survived both the fall and 4 days in the wilderness with such severe injuries. As they loaded me into the helicopter, I heard one medic say to another, "Isn't this near where that executive woman went missing earlier this week? The one who fell during a photo op? They've been searching the Western Quadrant, but there was no sign." My blood ran cold. They had reported my accident, but deliberately misdirected the search efforts. Of course, Ashley and Brent would need a body for the insurance payout. They would have told authorities approximately where I fell, but given them incorrect coordinates to ensure I wouldn't be found until it was too late. In the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness through a haze of pain medication and surgery, I caught fragments of conversations among the nurses. "Poor thing. Such a tragedy. Husband on his way from Seattle. Sister already identified her belongings. Funeral being planned for next week." They thought I was just another patient. They had no idea they were discussing my own death with me. Somewhere in the hospital billing system, I was a Miranda Taylor, attempted murder victim. I was Jane Doe, hiking accident, found miles from where Miranda Taylor had reportedly fallen to her death. The perfect cover for what would become my greatest advantage, the element of surprise. I spent 3 days in and out of surgeries before I was lucid enough to fully understand my situation. By then, according to the snippets of news I could gather from the hospital television, the search for my body had been called off due to dangerous conditions. The narrative being reported was tragic but straightforward. Successful businesswoman Miranda Taylor had accidentally fallen while taking photos during a helicopter tour of Alaska. Her body was presumed lost in the vast wilderness. What struck me most was how quickly Brent and Ashley had moved to cement this story. There were already quotes from both of them in the news articles, heartfelt statements about their devastating loss, their appreciation for the search teams, their request for privacy during this difficult time. Miranda lived life to the fullest, Brent told reporters, his voice reportedly breaking with emotion. She was always seeking the next adventure, the next beautiful view. That she died doing what she loved is our only consolation in this nightmare. Ashley's statement was equally performative. My sister was my best friend and my inspiration. I keep thinking about our last moments together, how happy she was seeing the glaciers from above. I will carry that memory with me always. The calculated precision of their lies made my blood boil. I was still struggling to process the betrayal when a new visitor entered my hospital room. Not a doctor or nurse, but a woman in a sharp pantsuit who introduced herself as Detective Lauren Reeves. The hikers who found you reported some concerning claims you made, she said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. About being pushed from a helicopter? By your sister? For a moment, I considered backtracking. Who would believe such an outlandish story? But something in Detective Reeves' straightforward gaze told me she wasn't there to dismiss me. It's true, I said. Every word of it. My sister Ashley pushed me from that helicopter, and I'm certain my husband Brent was part of the plan. I expected skepticism, but instead, she nodded thoughtfully. The coordinates where you were found are nowhere near where your sister and the pilot reported your fall. That was the first red flag. The second was the insurance policy your husband tried to expedite a claim on yesterday, $5 million, taken out just 3 weeks ago. My heart pounded painfully against my broken ribs. He's already trying to claim it? They both are. Your sister, as the secondary beneficiary, is helping expedite the process given the unusual circumstances. Their story is that you were leaning out for a photo when a gust of wind caught you. The pilot corroborates this. The pilot was in on it too, I said. He deliberately left us alone. Detective Reeves made notes. Here's where we stand, Miss Taylor. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. Your sister and husband think you're dead, which gives us a unique advantage. If you're willing, I'd like to keep it that way for a little longer while we build a case. And so began my official death, a strange limbo where I was simultaneously recovering from near-fatal injuries and watching my own life be dismantled by the people I had trusted most. From my hospital bed, with Detective Reeves as my ally, I learned the full extent of the betrayal. The insurance policy was just the beginning. Ashley had been named in my will as the executor of my estate if both Brent and I died, a detail I'd forgotten from our estate planning after our parents' death. With me dead and Brent potentially implicated if questions arose, Ashley would have significant control over my company and assets during probate. Digital forensics uncovered deleted text messages between Ashley and Brent going back 18 months, long enough to establish that their relationship had evolved from friendship to affair to criminal conspiracy. Need to move timeline up, one message from Brent read. Investors asking questions about past recommendations. Alaska trip perfect, Ashley had responded. Remote, dangerous terrain, easily explained accident. There were messages about the pilot too, how much to pay him to step away at the right moment, assurances that he needn't know the full plan, just that they wanted privacy for a special sister moment near a particularly scenic area. Financial records painted an even clearer picture. Brent was in serious professional trouble. His questionable investment recommendations were actually much worse. He had been misappropriating client funds for years, moving money between accounts to hide the shortfalls. The scheme was on the verge of collapse, with regulatory authorities beginning an informal inquiry into client complaints. Ashley, meanwhile, wasn't just struggling financially. She was underwater. The business failure I knew about had led to gambling in an attempt to recover her losses, creating a spiral of debt she could never escape on her marketing salary. My death would solve both their problems at once. The most chilling discovery came from surveillance footage Detective Reeves obtained from my home security system. The night after my accident, Brent and Ashley had met at my house, supposedly to comfort each other in their grief. The cameras captured them embracing in the kitchen, not in shared sorrow but in celebration, glasses of my favorite champagne in hand. To new beginnings, Brent toasted, his face showing not a trace of the devastated widower he played for the cameras. To 5 million reasons to smile, Ashley responded, clinking her glass against his before they kissed. Watching that footage from my hospital bed, something hardened inside me. The last lingering doubts, the desperate hope that perhaps I had misunderstood something fundamental about what happened in that helicopter, all of it crystallized into cold clarity. They had tried to kill me, they thought they had succeeded, and they were celebrating. By the time I was stable enough to be moved, Detective Reeves had built a preliminary case strong enough for arrest warrants. But I wanted more than arrests. I wanted to see their faces when their perfect plan collapsed. "They're planning your funeral for this Saturday," Detective Reeves told me. "Small, private ceremony. Family only, plus close friends." "I want to be there," I said immediately. She frowned. "That's not standard procedure in an ongoing investigation. Neither is the victim being presumed dead. I need to do this, not just for the case, but for me. I need to see them, to make them see me." What I didn't say was that I needed to reclaim my power, to transform from victim to victor in one dramatic moment. After much discussion and planning, Detective Reeves reluctantly agreed. We would attend the funeral together, she as part of the investigation team monitoring the suspects, me disguised as a distant cousin from out of town, face altered enough by bruising and strategic makeup to avoid immediate recognition. The plan was simple but effective. Observe, record, and gather any additional evidence of guilt from their behavior and conversations at the funeral. Then, once most attendees had left, confront them privately with police backup nearby. Their reactions, and hopefully incriminating statements made in shock, would be recorded as evidence. As the funeral approached, I prepared myself emotionally for what would be the most surreal experience of my life, attending my own memorial service, watching people mourn a death that never happened, and coming face to face with the architects of my intended murder. What I wasn't prepared for was how the experience would change me, not just in the moment, but forever after. The morning of my funeral dawned with appropriate gloom. Overcast skies threatening rain that never quite materialized, as if the weather itself was maintaining the suspense. Detective Reeves picked me up from the safe house where I'd been staying since my discharge from the hospital. I still needed a cane to walk, my body a canvas of fading bruises and healing cuts, but those visible injuries would actually help my disguise. "Remember, you're Madeline Foster, second cousin from my mother's side, visiting from Chicago," I reminded myself as Detective Reeves drove us to the small chapel Brent had selected for the service. "You never met Miranda personally, but felt compelled to pay respects." My transformation was subtle, but effective. Brunette hair dyed a muted auburn, colored contacts changing my blue eyes to hazel, thick-framed glasses, and makeup applied to subtly alter the appearance of my cheekbones and jawline. The lingering bruises and weight loss from my ordeal further obscured my identity. Unless someone knew to look for me, and no one would because I was supposedly dead, the disguise would hold. We parked a block away and watched as mourners began to arrive. My throat tightened at the sight of familiar faces, colleagues from my company, friends from college, neighbors from our street, all dressed in black, many openly weeping. These people genuinely believed I was dead. Their grief was real, even if the cause was manufactured. Then came the stars of this macabre show, Brent and Ashley arriving together in his black BMW. They emerged from the car with practiced solemnity, Ashley leaning slightly on Brent's arm in apparent grief. Her black dress was designer, new, I noted with a flash of anger, probably purchased with the anticipated insurance money. Brent wore a suit I had bought him for client meetings, his handsome face arranged in an expression of dignified sorrow. "Ready?" Detective Reeves asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. We entered the chapel after most guests were seated, slipping into the back row. The setup was tasteful, my portrait, a professional headshot from my company website, surrounded by white lilies and roses, an empty urn on a pedestal since there was no body to cremate. From our position, I could see Brent and Ashley in the front row, accepting condolences with downcast eyes and murmured thanks. Occasionally, Brent would place a comforting hand on Ashley's back, or she would squeeze his arm in support, gestures that would seem appropriate to everyone else, but now screamed their true relationship to my knowing eyes. The service began with soft music, one of my favorite classical pieces, I noted with surprise. Had Brent remembered that detail, or was it Ashley, who knew my taste well enough to include it? The thought that they had used genuine knowledge of me to craft this convincing performance made me feel physically ill. The minister spoke first, offering generic platitudes about life and loss. He had never met me, that much was clear from his impersonal remarks. Then came the eulogies. Ashley approached the podium first, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "My sister was everything to me," she began, her voice catching in what any acting coach would recognize as a practiced break. "From childhood, Miranda was my protector, my confidant, my inspiration. She achieved so much in her too short life, building a business from nothing, touching countless lives with her generosity and vision." I listened in growing disbelief as she wove truth and lies together seamlessly. Yes, I had built my business from scratch. Yes, I believed in mentoring young women in tech. But the sister she described, this saintly figure who always put family first and never let success change her kind heart, was a character invented for this audience, not the real me she had tried to murder. "Our last day together was so special," she continued, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Seeing the wonder of Alaska from above, sharing that experience sister to sister, I'll cherish those final moments forever." Miranda died doing what she loved, seeking beauty, embracing adventure. That's how I'll remember her always. The calculated cruelty of using my actual murder as a touching anecdote made my hands shake with rage. Detective Reeves placed a steadying hand on my arm, a silent reminder to maintain our cover. When Brent took the podium, his performance was equally convincing. He spoke of our whirlwind romance, our shared dreams, the future that had been so brutally stolen by a tragic accident. He even shed actual tears, whether from genuine acting skill or the relief of getting away with murder, I couldn't tell. "Miranda was the love of my life," he said, looking down at his wedding ring. "I keep expecting her to walk through the door, laughing about how this was all a big mistake. I don't know how to live in a world without her light, her drive, her passion. But I know she would want us to carry on, to honor her memory by living with the same courage and purpose that defined her life." Several of my friends spoke next, sharing genuine memories that pierced my heart. Jessica recalling our college road trip, where we got lost in 3 different states. Marco from my executive team describing how I had mentored him when no one else would take a chance on a non-traditional candidate, my elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson tearfully sharing how I always shoveled her walkway in winter without being asked. These real moments of connection, juxtaposed against the theatrical grief of the 2 people who had tried to kill me, created a disorienting emotional whiplash. These people had truly cared for me, and I was sitting among them, invisible, watching them mourn. As the formal service concluded, the minister invited attendees to a small reception in the adjoining hall. The family requests that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to the Miranda Taylor Foundation for Women in Technology, which Ashley will be establishing in her sister's memory. I almost laughed aloud at that. They were already planning how to launder the insurance money through a fake charity. Their foresight was almost admirable in its thoroughness. Most attendees filed toward the reception, but a small group moved to the cemetery plot nearby where a memorial stone would be placed despite the absence of a body. This was the opportunity we had been waiting for, a more private setting for the confrontation. Detective Reeves and I followed at a distance, watching as Brent and Ashley stood together at the empty gravesite. As the last few mourners drifted away after offering final condolences, they were finally alone, or so they thought. We approached slowly, my cane tapping softly on the cemetery path. Brent noticed us first, putting on his gracious, grieving widower face. "Thank you for coming," he said automatically. "Did you know Miranda through her company?" "You could say I knew her intimately," I replied, my natural voice emerging for the first time that day. He frowned slightly, not yet recognizing me, but sensing something off in my response. Ashley was more focused on the detective beside me, perhaps noticing her professional demeanor that didn't quite fit a funeral attendee. "I'm sorry, you are?" Ashley asked, her tone polite but wary. "Shocked that you would use my actual murder as a touching anecdote in your eulogy," I said, removing my glasses and staring directly into her eyes. The performance was impressive, though. Very moving. The moment of recognition was everything I had imagined during my darkest moments in the wilderness and hospital. Ashley's face drained of color so rapidly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, eyes widening in pure terror, as if seeing a ghost, which in her mind, she was. Brent recovered marginally faster, taking an instinctive step backward. "This is some kind of sick joke," he managed, looking to Ashley for support but finding her frozen in shock. "No joke," Detective Reeves said, showing her badge. "Just the miraculous survival of the woman you two conspired to murder." "Miranda?" Ashley finally whispered, her voice strangled. "How? You can't be alive." "I finished for her." "Disappointed?" "I survived the fall, Ashley. I survived 4 days in the wilderness with a broken leg and internal bleeding. I survived while you were picking out your funeral outfit and planning how to spend my money." Brent's shock was morphing quickly into calculation. I could almost see him formulating denials, explanations, ways to twist this into a misunderstanding. "Baby, what are you saying? There was an accident, you fell. We've been devastated." "Stop." My voice cut through his pathetic beginnings of a lie. "We have the texts between you two. We have the financial records. We have the pilot statement about being paid to leave us alone in the helicopter. We have surveillance footage of you celebrating my death. It's over." Ashley's survival instinct finally kicked in. She turned to run, but 2 uniformed officers who had been waiting discreetly nearby moved to block her path. Brent took a different approach, falling to his knees in a show of remorse. "Miranda, please, you have to understand. We were desperate. I made mistakes with client funds. I was going to go to prison. Ashley was drowning in debt. We never wanted to hurt you. We just needed to murder me for money?" I finished coldly. "That's the definition of wanting to hurt me, Brent." As the officers moved in to make the arrests, reading them their rights with the empty gravesite as backdrop, I finally delivered the statement I had rehearsed countless times during my recovery. "You know what your biggest mistake was? Not the sloppy planning or the obvious money trail. It was underestimating me. You saw me as nothing but a cash source, not as the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company through grit and intelligence, not as someone who would fight with everything she had to survive. You thought you were writing my ending, but you only set up the beginning of a story you won't like very much." As they were led away in handcuffs, Ashley silent and shell-shocked, Brent still trying to explain and justify, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also an immense sadness for what I had lost. Not just the sister and husband who had betrayed me, but the versions of them I had believed in for so many years. Detective Reeves stood beside me as we watched the patrol car drive away. "That was quite a performance," she said quietly. "How do you feel?" I considered the question carefully, leaning heavily on my cane. "Like I've attended my own funeral and witnessed my own resurrection." "I'm not sure there's a word for that feeling." She nodded thoughtfully. "There probably should be." We turned away from the empty grave that would never be filled, at least not with me. The media would soon learn of this extraordinary turn of events, and my private drama would become public spectacle. But in this moment, walking slowly away from my own memorial service, I felt a strange sense of peace mingled with the pain. I had died in a way. The trusting woman who had boarded that helicopter was gone forever. But someone new had survived the fall, someone stronger, warier, and far less willing to mistake performance for love. The media frenzy that followed was inevitable and overwhelming. Back from the dead, CEO survives murder plot by sister and husband, screamed the headlines. Every news outlet wanted an exclusive on what they called the helicopter heiress story, a nickname I detested but couldn't escape. My face was suddenly everywhere, my private trauma dissected for public consumption. I declined all interviews initially, focusing instead on the legal proceedings that would determine Ashley and Brent's fate. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Valerie Montgomery, warned me that cases like this, even with substantial evidence, could be unpredictable. "They've hired separate defense teams," she explained during our first meeting. "That's good for us. It means they'll likely turn on each other rather than presenting a united front." She was right. Within weeks of their arrest, the carefully constructed partnership between Ashley and Brent disintegrated completely. Their betrayal of me evolved into mutual betrayal, each attempting to minimize their own culpability by maximizing the other's. Brent's defense strategy emerged first. He claimed to be a victim of Ashley's manipulation, a grieving husband who had been drawn into her plot through emotional coercion and lies. My client was led to believe this was an insurance fraud scheme, not a murder plot, his attorney argued in preliminary hearings. Ms. Thompson convinced him that her sister would be safely evacuated by an accomplice on the ground after staging the fall. He never intended actual harm to come to his wife. Ashley's team countered with equal desperation. Ms. Thompson was under the psychological control of Brent Taylor, who had been systematically isolating her from other relationships and exploiting her financial vulnerability. She participated under explicit threats to her safety. Watching them scramble to paint each other as the mastermind was both vindicating and exhausting. The pilot, facing his own charges as an accomplice, quickly accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony, confirming that both Ashley and Brent had been involved in planning the accident, and that he had been told I would only be frightened, not actually pushed. The trial itself was a grueling 3-week ordeal. I testified for 2 full days, recounting every excruciating detail from the helicopter push to my wilderness survival to the funeral confrontation. Looking directly at Ashley and Brent in the courtroom, their designer clothes exchanged for prison attire, their confident expressions replaced by desperate calculation, I felt an unexpected emotion. Pity. Not forgiveness, certainly not understanding, but a distant pity for the smallness of their ambitions and the emptiness of their characters. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both defendants. The judge, citing the extraordinary calculation and cold-bloodedness of the crime, sentenced them to the maximum, 25 years for Ashley, 28 for Brent, due to the additional financial crimes that had come to light during the investigation. As they were led from the courtroom, Ashley finally breaking down in sobs, Brent still maintaining a stoic facade, I realized that the conclusion of the legal process didn't bring the closure I had expected. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but my personal healing had barely begun. The months following the trial were a blur of physical and emotional recovery. My body gradually healed. The broken femur required 2 additional surgeries and extensive physical therapy, but eventually I progressed from wheelchair to walker to cane to walking unassisted. The physical scars would remain, but they faded from angry red to silvery white, becoming part of my new normal. The psychological recovery proved more challenging. I worked with Dr. Eleanor Rivera, a trauma specialist who helped me navigate the complex landscape of betrayal by those closest to me. "What you're experiencing is compound trauma," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "There's the physical trauma of the fall and survival, yes, but also the attachment trauma of having your fundamental trust violated by your primary relationships. Your brain is essentially rewiring its understanding of safety. The nightmares were the worst, vivid recreations of the fall, sometimes with variations where I watched myself plummeting from above, sometimes where I hit the ground instead of the trees. I would wake, gasping, my body convinced it was still falling. Dr. Rivera taught me grounding techniques, ways to remind my nervous system that I was safe in the present moment. "Place your feet firmly on the floor," she would instruct. "Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Remind your body where and when it exists." Slowly, the acute panic began to subside, though certain triggers remained powerful: the sound of helicopter blades, unexpected drops in elevation, even the particular shade of blue that matched the Alaskan sky that day. While working on my psychological recovery, I also faced the challenge of reclaiming my professional identity. My company had been in leadership limbo during my death and subsequent reappearance. Marco, my loyal COO, had kept operations running, but strategic decisions had been postponed, and some nervous clients had taken their business elsewhere. The board called an emergency meeting upon my return, expressing concern about the company's stability given both the trauma I had experienced and the sensational nature of the case. "The publicity is problematic," one board member said delicately. "Investors are worried about associating with such a high-profile scandal." "Problematic," I repeated, feeling a flash of the new anger that seemed to live just beneath my surface these days. I was the victim of attempted murder. I survived against impossible odds. I helped bring the perpetrators to justice. Which part of that narrative concerns our investors, exactly? The room fell silent until Marco spoke up. "I think what Miranda is suggesting, and I agree, is that we can reframe this story as one of resilience, determination, and triumph. Those are values our company has always stood for." That reframing became our new direction. Rather than hiding from the publicity, we leaned into it, on my terms. I gave a single in-depth interview to a respected business journal, focusing not on the sensational aspects of the case, but on the psychological resources and problem-solving mentality that had helped me survive both the wilderness and the betrayal. The same skills that build successful companies, assessing resources, identifying critical paths, maintaining focus under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, saved my life in that forest, I explained. And they're the same skills that will guide our company forward. The interview resonated widely, changing the conversation from lurid fascination to professional respect. New clients approached us specifically because of the demonstrated resilience, and most existing clients recommitted to our services. 6 months after the trial, I made 2 significant decisions that would shape my future. First, I established the Wilderness Survival Foundation, using a portion of my own funds, ironically including the life insurance policy that had been returned to me once the murder plot was exposed. The foundation focused on 2 missions: providing wilderness survival training to the public and supporting survivors of intimate partner betrayal and violence. Second, I began the process of meeting with other betrayal survivors, people whose stories weren't as dramatic as mine, but who carried similar wounds. A former client whose business partner had embezzled funds and framed him for tax evasion. A woman whose sister had stolen her identity and destroyed her credit. A man whose wife of 30 years had systematically turned their children against him with years of subtle lies. These connections formed the beginning of a support network that would eventually become as important to me as my business achievements. In helping others navigate their rebuilding process, I found frameworks for my own healing. 1 year after the helicopter incident, I returned to Alaska, not to the exact location of my fall, but to the hospital that had treated my injuries. I brought a substantial donation for their trauma center and spent time with the emergency team that had saved my life. "I didn't expect you to ever want to see Alaska again," admitted Dr. Winters, who had overseen my emergency surgeries. "It's not Alaska's fault that human beings can be monsters," I replied. "This place is part of my story now, the place where I died in one sense and was reborn in another. I needed to reclaim it." As I stood looking out over the majestic wilderness from a safe, solid viewing platform rather than a helicopter, I felt a sense of perspective that had been missing in the chaotic aftermath of the trial. The landscape that had nearly killed me had also provided the means for my survival: the trees that broke my fall, the water that quenched my thirst, the shelter that protected me from the elements. Perhaps there was a metaphor there, I thought, about how the very experiences that break us can also become the source of our greatest strength. Exactly 1 year to the day after I crashed my own funeral, I found myself sitting alone in the cemetery, facing the now-removed memorial stone that had once borne my name. The grounds crew had replaced it with fresh sod months ago, but I could still see the outline where it had been, a ghost rectangle marking the spot where I was supposed to rest but never would. So much had changed in that year. My company had not only recovered but expanded, launching a new cybersecurity division that drew on my newfound appreciation for preparing for worst-case scenarios. The Wilderness Survival Foundation had trained over 2,000 people in basic outdoor emergency skills and provided therapy services to dozens of betrayal survivors. My physical recovery was as complete as it would ever be. I no longer needed a cane, though my left leg ached predictably before rainstorms, and certain movements would always remain difficult. The scars had faded to the point where makeup could conceal them for professional appearances, though I increasingly chose not to bother. They were part of my story now, badges of survival rather than marks of victimhood. After sitting at the empty gravesite for nearly an hour, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were actually buried. I hadn't visited since before the helicopter incident. In fact, Ashley and I had come together the previous Christmas, placing matching wreaths and sharing memories of holiday traditions from our childhood.
Hey, Mom.
Hey, Dad, I said quietly, placing fresh flowers between their headstones. I'm not sure if you know what happened with Ashley. Part of me hopes you don't. The wind rustled through nearby trees, the only response to my words. I keep thinking about what you would say if you were here. Would you ask me to forgive her? Would you be able to forgive her yourselves? She was your daughter too. You loved her just as much as you loved me. I trace my fingers over their names carved in stone. I think about nature versus nurture a lot these days. We had the same parents, the same upbringing. Where did that darkness in her come from? Was it always there? Did I miss it, or did something happen to create it? Is there some darkness in me too, just waiting for the right circumstances? These were questions I had explored extensively in therapy, but had found no satisfying answers. The uncomfortable truth was that human beings, even those sharing DNA, even those we believe we know completely, remain fundamentally mysterious to one another. When I returned home that evening, a letter was waiting for me, forwarded from my lawyer, having passed through the prison screening system. Ashley's handwriting on the envelope was instantly recognizable, the same neat, precise script that had addressed birthday cards and Christmas presents throughout our lives. For several hours, I left it unopened on my kitchen counter, going about my evening routine while eyeing it warily, as if it might somehow contain the same danger its author had once posed. Finally, just before midnight, I slid my finger under the flap and extracted 3 pages of prison stationery. Miranda, it began, no, dear. No terms of endearment. I've written this letter 17 times. Each version sounds more false than the last, probably because there is no way to authentically apologize for trying to murder your sister. Any explanation I offer will sound like an excuse. Any remorse I express will seem like manipulation. I accept that. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and requesting it would only be another selfish act. But I do want you to know that in the endless hours of confinement here, I've finally begun to understand what I did, not just to you, but to myself. I destroyed everything good in my life because I couldn't bear that you had everything I wanted. The jealousy started so small, little moments of resentment when you'd succeed at something that had been difficult for me. It grew so gradually, I didn't recognize the monster it was becoming. By the time Brent came into our lives, I was already so poisoned by it that his manipulation found fertile ground. This isn't an attempt to shift blame. I made my choices. I looked my own sister in the eyes and pushed her to what should have been her death. The person capable of that deserves to be exactly where I am now. What I'm trying to say, inadequately, is that I see myself clearly for the first time. Prison has stripped away every distraction, every justification. All that's left is the truth of what I did and who I became. You survived, against all odds. From what I've read in the articles my counselor shares with me, you're thriving. I'm glad. Not because it lessens my guilt. Nothing could do that, but because the world is better with you in it. That's something I lost sight of for too long. I won't write again unless you want me to. This letter isn't the beginning of a reconciliation campaign. It's just the truth, finally. Too late to matter. Ashley. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down, my emotions too tangled to name. Was there manipulation hidden in her words?
Probably.
Was there also genuine remorse?
Possibly.
Did it change anything?
No.
But something about having her acknowledgement, the unvarnished admission of what she had done, without the courtroom gymnastics of blame shifting, provided a piece of closure I hadn't realized I was missing. I didn't respond to the letter that night or the next day or the next week. I brought it to my next therapy session, where Dr. Rivera and I discussed what Ashley's words meant to my healing process and what, if anything, I wanted to do with them. You don't owe her a response, Dr. Rivera reminded me. Your healing doesn't depend on maintaining any connection with her. I know, I said. But I keep thinking about that moment in the helicopter, the last moment when she was still just my sister and not the person who tried to kill me. There was a split second before she pushed me when I saw something change in her eyes. I've replayed that moment so many times, wondering if I could have said or done something different. That's a common reaction for trauma survivors, Dr. Rivera said gently, looking for the moment where you could have changed the outcome. But Ashley's choices weren't your responsibility. Intellectually, I know that. But there's still this voice asking why I didn't see it coming, why I trusted so completely. Because trust is human. Vulnerability is human. Those aren't weaknesses, Miranda. They're the foundations of connection. That night, I made a decision about Ashley's letter. I would neither respond nor completely close the door. I would sit with the complexity of having a sister who is also my would-be murderer, a person I had once loved who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. I would accept that both realities could exist simultaneously and that my healing didn't require resolving that paradox. As for Brent, I felt nothing but a distant contempt. His betrayal, while equally severe, lacked the primal violation of a sibling's attempt on my life. He had been my husband for 3 years. Ashley had been my sister for 32. The depth of history made her betrayal cut deeper, but also made its aftermath more complicated. In the weeks that followed the anniversary of my death, I found myself entering a new phase of recovery, one focused less on processing the trauma and more on defining the life I wanted to create moving forward. The question shifted from, why did this happen to me, to who am I becoming because of what happened? The survival skills that had kept me alive in the wilderness became metaphorical guides for my new life. Just as I had assessed my resources and injuries after the fall, I now took inventory of my strengths and vulnerabilities with clear eyes. Just as I had created shelter from available materials, I now built protective boundaries around my new relationships while remaining open to genuine connection. I began dating again, cautiously, selectively. James, a civil engineer I met through the Foundation's wilderness training program, became a steady presence in my life. He approached my story with neither morbid fascination nor excessive caution, treating my experience as part of me but not my defining characteristic. What impressed me most wasn't that you survived the fall or even the wilderness, he told me after several months of dating. It was that you chose to use what happened to help others. You could have disappeared into a private life of justified paranoia, but instead you built something meaningful from the wreckage. His perspective helped me see my own journey more clearly. The wilderness survival had been physical and immediate. Splint the broken leg, find water, create shelter, signal for help. The emotional survival that followed was more complex and ongoing. Acknowledge the pain, process the betrayal, rebuild trust selectively, find meaning in the experience. 2 years after the helicopter incident, I gave my first public speech about the experience at a conference for trauma survivors. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of people who had endured their own versions of betrayal and loss, I finally found the words to articulate what I had learned. We often talk about surviving trauma as if it's a return to who we were before, I began. But that's not how it works. You don't go back to being the person you were. That person is gone, not because they were weak or flawed, but because trauma fundamentally changes how we understand ourselves and the world around us. The question isn't how to become that person again. The question is how to honor what they believed in while becoming someone new, someone who carries the truth of what happened without being defined by it. Someone who understands darkness more intimately but chooses light anyway, not out of naivety, but out of informed courage. I'm not the woman who boarded that helicopter in Alaska 2 years ago. That woman trusted completely, loved unconditionally, believed in the fundamental goodness of those closest to her. I honor her optimism and her openness. I grieve for her loss. But I'm not only the woman who fell from the sky and crawled through wilderness with a broken body either. That woman survived on rage and determination, on the driving need to see justice done. I respect her resilience and her strength. I acknowledge her pain. I'm what comes after both of them, a third version that incorporates the trust of the first and the resilience of the second, but exists in a new space of chosen vulnerability and informed hope. This version doesn't trust blindly, but chooses to trust carefully. She doesn't love without boundaries, but loves with healthy ones. She isn't naive about human capacity for betrayal, but she refuses to let that knowledge close her off from human connection. That's what survival really means, not just continuing to exist, but continuing to evolve. Not just enduring the fall, but learning to fly differently afterward. As I concluded my speech to resounding applause, I felt a sense of completion, not of my healing journey, which would continue throughout my life, but of the acute phase of recovery. The story of the helicopter, the betrayal, and the wilderness would always be part of me, but it no longer needed to be the primary story I told about myself or the lens through which I viewed every experience. There would be other chapters, other challenges, other triumphs. The woman who had crashed her own funeral was ready to attend the celebration of her new life, not as a ghost or a victim, but as the author of her continuing story. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you deeply trusted? How did you rebuild afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey of survival and transformation resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that there's life after betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this incredibly personal story. Remember, even the deepest wounds can become the source of your greatest strength.